In this news roundup of a week on July the 8th, 2022, Boris Johnson is finally felled as a long downward spiral comes to its natural end. China brings in and then abandons vaccine mandates as the UK and other countries are showing an unexplained increase in non-COVID deaths. The EU sees turmoil as it classifies nuclear and gas as green, and Dutch farmers protest draconian laws on nitrogen. And in this week's Short Thought, I reflect on what makes for effective leadership, as we even wonder whether we'll see it ever again in political life. My name's Mallen Baker, this is the Mallen Baker Show. As has always been inevitable, the Boris Johnson death of 1,000 cuts finally came to its conclusion this week. Having survived the previous controversy seriously blooded and bruised, the Prime Minister inevitably simply blundered straight into the next one, and in this case it was a blunder too far. In recognition of his ability to escape those who keep trying to trap him, Johnson has had the nickname this year of the Greased Piglet. This week we got to the brutal reality, however greasy the piglet, sooner or later it's going to end up in a bacon roll. It was interesting because the UK, with its unwritten constitution, with its checks and balances delivered mainly through parliamentary processes, it had never been confronted before by a leader who would simply refuse to resign and keep going. In times gone past, when a leader had lost the confidence of the party, they would get a discreet visit from the men in grey suits, the party grandees, who would explain to the incumbent that their useful time had come to an end. And those incumbents would then duly write their resignation speech and do the expected and the decent thing. Well, in this case, Johnson told them to sling their hook and said that nothing was going to stop him. Nothing was going to stop him from going on and on into at least a third term he predicted only a couple of days ago. How do you stop someone who does that, even after it is obvious that he has lost the support of most in his party? Well, this week we found out. And basically it came down to the rest of his government resigning, sparked off by two of the most senior cabinet ministers, Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, Sajid Javid, the Health Secretary. Johnson wasn't swayed by that. He quickly replaced them with other ministers. They were followed by a sprinkling of other ministers resigning, and Boris Johnson was still unmoved. So more ministers resigned. By the end of Wednesday, his government had lost around 50 of them at one level or another. And still he wasn't swayed. It was a good chance to cut down the size of government, he said. He didn't need all those ministers anyway. So, yet more resigned, including more cabinet ministers, and then one of the two replacements he'd promoted the previous day also resigned, and the other one told him that he should go. Ultimately, if a Prime Minister can't get enough members of his own party to agree to fill the post of government, he has nowhere to go. He can't run the whole thing himself. Not only can't you get a functioning government, but it also becomes clear that you've lost the sufficient quantity of support that you would need to fend off the future attempts to remove you. So the Backbencher 1922 committee was due to hold new elections for its members this next week, and they would elect a majority who would then be minded to change the rules to allow for a second confidence vote. It was against the old rules. And it was clear from all the people who had voted to support Johnson in the first confidence vote, who now said that they would vote against him in the second one, he was going to lose, and he was going to lose heavily. But it never had to go there. At the end of the day, nobody wanted to be a minister on the Titanic. The only surprise was that Johnson eventually actually acknowledged this and resigned. The main talk had been that with his devotion to the ancient classics, he would see honour in being killed on the battlefield, metaphorically speaking, than in resigning. Even then, with his resignation speech, there was no indication of humility, recognising that at any point he might have made any mistakes whatsoever. Instead, he blamed eccentric colleagues who he said were following a herd instinct, a remarkably enduring feature of narcissistic leaders. Every single thing is always someone else's fault. A theme he will no doubt burnish for his autobiography, which won't be that far in the future. There will now begin a 2 to 3 month process of choosing his successor. On the plus side, all the likely contenders are more serious politicians than Boris Johnson, which you might take as damning with faint praise, but let's be thankful for it anyway. A snap poll of Conservative Party members, who will be the only electorate for this process, put the current Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, as the favourite. That's a remarkable fact, actually. Wallace has been given huge credit for being an adult in the room with his government, focused on supporting Ukraine and facing up to the new geopolitical realities of the world. By all accounts, he's done that rather well. He has the reputation of being sober and sensible, a man with a high sense of personal integrity and of duty and service to his country. When a leader is thrown out, the next person elected will very often be the diametric opposite of the ousted leader. But I've not seen anyone who can describe what Wallace thinks about most of the major issues facing the country right now. I mean, he's been strong on security, yes, strong on defence. What does he think about education, about the energy crisis, the economy and the cost of living crisis, about the environment and dealings with the EU, all of which are rather important at the moment? We will know more of those things, of course, after the election campaign has happened, but it's remarkable that he is the favourite right now, even though we don't know any of those things. It shows you that what people in the Tories most want is someone who is competent, grown up and serious, everything Johnson was not. And I celebrate that because for the last 6 months particularly, that is exactly what I have been banging on about here, probably ad nauseum. But that used to be the minimum bar. I do hope they won't settle for that being the only criteria. There should be a bit more serious scrutiny than that when it goes into choosing the next Prime Minister. One of the other candidates was also trending on Twitter yesterday, and that was Steve Baker. Steve Baker is positioned as the hard Brexit, anti-net zero guy. So you can imagine there was a flutter of anxious Greens and Remainers predicting catastrophe should he be successful. Now, he doesn't start the campaign with as much support as some of the others, although he has a core of Thatcherite Tory support, and he has been a highly influential figure in recent years. He's probably also one of the most thoughtful and eloquent political thinkers amongst them, a fact that his rabid critics probably won't credit. Is he anti-net zero? Well, he's certainly anti some of how it's been done to date, and he's associated with climate skeptic organisations. I think his position is more nuanced than that suggests at face value, based on no more than a long interview I heard with him about 9 months ago. And he would certainly be aware that he would be unlikely to get elected as leader with an out-and-out hostile position on the issue. So all I'm saying is it could be a more interesting policy debate election than you might think, and that wouldn't be a bad thing where some sacred cows get challenged. Now, that's just 2 candidates, of course. It will be a very crowded field, and who knows who will eventually emerge. Dominic Cummings, Johnson's former top advisor, was not hugely complimentary about some of the candidates, whilst naming no names. He declared that the odds of an improvement were, quote, dangerously close to 50-50. Meanwhile, as you can imagine, a number of figures in certain parts of the country and of the world were celebrating the Johnson downfall. The first to get their mockery on record were the Russian government figures. They called Johnson a, quote, stupid clown who finally got his just reward for arming Ukraine against Russia, which was one of the few things he did that actually had overwhelming support in the UK. So good luck in your fond hopes for a change on that score with a new leader. Various news media were equally scathing in the leading EU nations. But it does raise the question of whether a new face in number 10 will give the EU, and particularly President Macron of France, the opportunity to reboot the relationship, something they were reportedly reluctant to do so long as Johnson was still in control because they directly blame him for Brexit. The thing is that no candidate seeking the support of the Conservative base is going to win votes by downplaying the ongoing commitment to Brexit and for standing up for Britain. So that may well not turn out to be much different. At the time of shooting this video, the Chinese government hadn't issued any kind of statement on Johnson's downfall, although at least one Chinese politician based in Hong Kong had said, "Good riddance." Maybe they were focused instead on the job at hand. Kind of raises the question as to what job at hand that might be. This week, the FBI and MI5 did their first ever joint platform to raise the alarm of what they see as China laying the foundations designed to protect it from the sort of sanctions currently being applied against Russia. This suggests, they argued, that it is actively considering whether to go ahead with the threatened invasion of Taiwan. Director of the FBI, Chris Wei, said that China was drawing lessons from what's happening with Russia and its invasion of Ukraine. Should a takeover of Taiwan come to pass, it would be a much bigger disruption than what we're currently seeing with Russia and Ukraine. The head of MI5, Ken McCallum, said the intelligence agencies were being stretched as never before to just try to keep up with the sheer quantity of aggressive spying, intellectual property theft and hacking being carried out by Chinese agencies. He said MI5 is running 7 times as many investigations related to the CCP as compared to 2018. McCallum also said that the challenge posed by the Chinese Communist Party was game-changing, while Ray called it immense and breathtaking. The other thing China definitely is focusing on is COVID, which remains a real challenge for the zero-COVID policy. This week saw the government announcing its first ever COVID-19 vaccine mandate for the city of Beijing. From July the 11th, people will need to show proof of vaccination to enter a wide range of public places. The move reflects frustration with vaccine hesitancy, specifically amongst the elderly population, which of course is the vulnerable part of the population. And perhaps also dawning realisation that the draconian lockdowns imposed in recent months on Beijing and Shanghai have had a devastating impact on citizens and the economy in those cities, and also have pushed the citizens to the end of their tether, to the degree where maybe they will not be so ready to comply if those are reimposed again in the future. Social media users have been pointing out that the National Health Authority's guidance has always been that vaccination should be voluntary. What changed? Some of them have been asking, and it is a fair and interesting question. And what changed in the event was the vaccine mandate. Since following the backlash, the move was promptly reversed, something that we're not used to seeing from China in relation to public pressure. It gives some indication that things are not quite as cut and dried there as people might presume at first glance. What changed? Well, maybe more behind the scenes than we think. It's a question that, in a different but related context, is being asked as well in the UK. In recent weeks, there has been a rise in all-cause mortality, significantly above the expected average levels for the time of year, but only a minority of that, 10%, is due to COVID. According to the Office for National Statistics, there were 1,540 excess deaths in the week ending June the 24th. A higher percentage of those than usual took place in the home. Health experts have been raising the alarm about the figures and calling for an urgent investigation. Well, look, this shouldn't probably be a surprise. After all, throughout all of the arguments and the debates about lockdowns and other COVID policies, the arguments were made that all of those cancelled cancer screenings and all of the other similar appointments, they were going to come back to bite us down the road. This graph of government statistics processed by The Spectator magazine shows a chasm of 8 million fewer referrals in 2020 than pre-pandemic levels. In some ways, it would be remarkable if they didn't feed through into higher mortality. As I said in the earliest stages, it will probably be several years before we can fully and properly account for what were the real costs of lockdowns. Health experts have echoed that sentiment, suggesting that the pandemic response and lack of access to healthcare are strong candidates for blame, along with the cost of living crisis, which I would get more if it was winter, to be honest. Professor of Medicine Paul Hunter said that there were multiple potential factors, and he said this: "I think the reality is going to be quite complex, but it's something we do need to be aware of and actually try and understand. Needless to say, some people out there didn't think it was complex at all. They simply jumped to whatever their favourite assumption was for quite a few people, that it was all because of vaccines. Now look, all possibilities should be looked at, but apart from wishful thinking, there are some reasons to think it's not that simple. So for instance, although the same phenomenon has been seen in a number of other countries, it's not been consistently the case. For instance, Sweden is not being hit by it. Sweden didn't much lock down in the same way, of course, but it did roll out vaccination. So if it was just all down to vaccinations, you would expect it would be in Sweden just as much. But it's not so easily tied to just lockdown policies either. There's excess mortality in Greece and Cyprus, but not in Italy, which certainly did lock down. It is in France, but not in Spain. So none of us should take it as read that it will line up neatly with any of our hot takes. Instead, like the professor said, it seems likely to be complicated. That makes it all the more important to put the work in to get to the bottom of it, and to do so without preconceptions. Now in other news, in the Netherlands, the country is seeing large-scale protests from farmers who are furious at new environmental regulations on nitrogen pollution. The government has said that emissions of nitrogen oxide and ammonia have to be drastically reduced close to nature areas that are part of a network of protected habitats. This led to it to announce a reduction in emissions by 50% by just 2030. In a parliamentary debate prompted by failures in the policy to date, some politicians suggested that the halving of the livestock sector would be the best solution to the problem. Well, no surprise, that's led to large-scale protests by farmers who face being pushed out of business. Some 40,000 gathered last week, many driving tractors, bringing traffic to a standstill around the country. Some have dumped hay bales on the roads, others have lit bonfires outside town and city halls. And on Tuesday this week, police actually opened fire at tractor-riding farmers, although nobody was injured. The government said it was conducting an investigation. It had not been a deliberate police decision to open fire in that instance. It's just the latest instance of EU-driven policy creating a direct conflict between the imperatives of growing food and protecting the environment. The Netherlands is a hotspot for the conflict because it has one of the most intensive agricultural systems in Europe and indeed the world. It is one of the 3 leading exporters of fruit and vegetables, even though it's a relatively small country. Farmers argued that other EU countries were not targeting agriculture in the same punitive way, and expressed the view that whenever environmental issues are debated, it is always the farmers who are blamed first and foremost. The protests have received extensive media coverage and saw a number of provincial councils quickly dropping the more restrictive guidelines in response. But at the government level, things are more blocked. It's arguably the case that there is a real problem that needs to be solved, which has gotten worse because the problem was ignored and deferred for decades, which is often the case. But that said, it's also a stark example of how politicians lurching from one extreme to the other without attention to real-world consequences is destroying whatever base of legitimacy they might think they have for taking action. If the EU pushes on with a determination to switch 25% of all its land to organic agriculture, for instance, which will mean reduced yield and various disruptions on the farming community, we should expect that what's happening in the Netherlands will just be the start. Now, the EU did switch direction in one important aspect this week when it finally agreed that nuclear power could be classified as green for the purpose of investment in net zero transitions. Not only that, but also natural gas if used as part of a transition away from coal. The move now means that both can get subsidies and cheaper loans over the coming decades. Needless to say, campaigners condemned the move as greenwashing, and certain countries also lined up against it, particularly Austria and Luxembourg. Supporting the move, on the other hand, were countries such as France and Poland, as well as recently anointed candidate to the EU, Ukraine, which said that excluding gas and nuclear would be particularly challenging for their hoped-for post-war reconstruction. It's an interesting glimmer of pragmatism in the face of the energy crisis and geopolitical uncertainties. Whether such pragmatism will ultimately come to frame some sort of response to the concerns of farmers, that's another question. The importance of good leadership has been much in the mind this week, as Boris Johnson's lack of leadership qualities eventually brought him down. And on the day of shooting this video, the world has been shocked by the assassination of the former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Abe was recently one of Japan's longest-standing leaders and was respected by those who had dealt with him. The assassination was a reminder that all the human beings who put themselves in that position, they take risks upon themselves, risks which don't necessarily disappear after they've left office. When I made a few passing comments about President Trump's term last week, I had a certain amount of, shall we say, hot criticism from people who remain his fans, and it seems to me that this was a moment to explain what I see as being the marks of good leadership. Remember, I am not a team member for any side on the political spectrum when it comes to this. I have criteria that I will apply equally. But I dealt a lot with the business world in my previous day job. Businesses have invested a lot of time establishing what makes for good leadership there, and the qualities I tend to value most highly come from that experience, and they are these. 1. Having a strong vision of what needs to be done. Leaders who want to be leaders because of prestige or the theory of being powerful without actually knowing what they want to achieve, they are not to be trusted as leaders because their focus is themselves, not on the people they're meant to be serving. 2. Integrity. That includes, telling the truth. There are times when politics forces you to be smart about it. Journalists will ask questions that are designed as traps, and you have to definitely avoid falling into them. Good leaders manage to do that without actually lying. It also includes other things, such as giving other people credit for their successes, not taking them all yourself. Doing what you know needs to be done, not just that which is easy or convenient or self-serving. All of that is integrity. 3. Skilled communication. If you're going to motivate the people you're leading and unite them around your common vision, you have to be able to communicate that vision in a way that they find relatable and inspiring and meaningful to them. 4. Loyalty. If you're going to demand loyalty from your team, and perhaps even in difficult times from your country, then start by understanding that loyalty flows both ways. 5. Decisiveness. Now that doesn't mean just making rapid decisions. Often taking a bit more time is the right approach to making the best decisions. And then you make them and then you put them into practice. Nothing's worse than decisions made in undue haste without proper attention that are then quickly reversed when the entirely predictable consequences start to come into view and the farmers start protesting, for example. 6. Basic managerial competence. Understanding how to use the organisation to get things done, rather than thinking they'll just magically happen because you gave an order. Systems are made up of human beings. They don't just move according to their own volition. If you can't get stuff done, then your leadership isn't worth anything. 7. Attract the highest quality team you can get. Weak leaders surround themselves with even weaker people, so no one is in danger of outshining them. Really confident leaders get people who are better than them at the jobs that need doing. 8. Breaking out of the bubble. Leaders get surrounded by yes men who act as filters, inevitably. They have to actively work to break through that, to reach out to people, to listen to their perspectives and make those people feel as though they have been heard. Now, those are all leadership qualities. They're not the only ones, but they are the ones I particularly acknowledge and value when I see them. None of it is about having policies that I agree with. Obviously, if I'm presented with a choice of equally competent leaders, well, I'm delighted to be able to vote on their policies. But in the last few decades, unless the policies were radical and extreme, I was generally more interested in whether or not they were competent, because we rarely got more than one. And recently, not even that. And if confronted with people who have only some of the qualities on the list, I would suggest prioritising those which are about character, not about skills. Skills, after all, can be learned. But if someone has character flaws, those tend to get worse, not better, under pressure. So this is why I have been critical of some of the modern leaders of our time. That's the yardstick I'm moving. And that's why I'm happy to say cautiously positive things about Steve Baker, even though his position on net zero is not mine. And it's why I was equally critical of both Trump and Biden in the 2020 election, with neither showing what I believed to be essential leadership qualities for difficult times. But the challenge for politicians is that what makes great leadership often means that they take difficult decisions, and great leadership is often the hardest course for them to take, and often again not valued by people who only see it in tribal or self-interested terms. The fate of Shinzo Abe perhaps has illustrated that as much as anything. I try therefore to be respectful of the difficulty of the job, and up to a point understanding of the fact that there are 20 ways to get it wrong for every one way to get it right. We need better leaders than we've had in the last few years, but let's not sabotage the process by expecting perfection. Let's demand higher standards for sure. Right now, I would be happy to have people of integrity who are basically competent. We can probably dream higher than that, but, one step at a time. All right. My thanks, as always, to the good people who support this channel on Patreon. I cannot overstate it, how much none of this would be possible without the support of that group. It enables me to make videos on any subject that I find to be interesting, regardless of whether YouTube demonetizes it or not, as they did last week. And they enable me to spend the time that it takes to make videos at all. If you would like to add your support for the independent, fact-focused and non-ideological content I aim to produce here, please head on over to patreon.com/Mallen Baker. It is always appreciated. Either way, have a great week. My name is Mallen Baker. This is the Mallen Baker Show. Thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, please share with anyone else you think would also enjoy it. Word of mouth is really important to us. And if you've not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? As the saying goes, that subscribe button won't smash itself.